Ella's Study Notes, where advanced English meets real-life magic.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving headfirst into the world of the Vikings. We're going to find out if everything you've seen in the movies is actually true, or, just really good fiction. Get ready, we're about to bust some serious myths. So, let me start with a big one, a question I bet you've wondered about. When you picture a Viking in your head, what do you see? I'm guessing a big beard, maybe a giant axe, and, of course, a helmet with huge horns sticking out, right? But is that real? Well, we're about to find out. I mean, this guy is everywhere, in cartoons, movies, even on team logos. This is the classic Hollywood Viking we all know. But is it historically accurate? Today, we're going to separate the facts from the fiction. Okay, so before we start busting myths, who were the real Vikings anyway? Well, they were incredible sailors, they were traders, and yep, sometimes they were raiders. They came from Scandinavia, that's modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And their time, from about 800 to 1050 AD, is famously known as the Viking Age. And you guys, just look at how far they traveled. This map shows their incredible reach. They were master shipbuilders and navigators, exploring and trading all across Europe, into the Middle East, and they were even the first Europeans to land in North America. Seriously amazing. All right, now that we know who they were, let's get to the main event. We are going to tackle 5 of the biggest, most common myths about Vikings and see what history really has to say about them. First up, myth number 1. You can almost picture it, right? A big movie battle scene, and the Vikings roll up these massive catapults to smash down castle walls. Seems like a pretty good way to win a fight, doesn't it? But the reality is completely different. See, Vikings were all about speed and surprise attacks. Trying to haul a huge, clunky catapult onto one of their fast, sleek longships, that would have been a total nightmare. Instead, they used weapons they could actually carry: spears, swords, axes, and bows and arrows. So the key English word here is catapult. In Chinese, you could call this a 投石机, 投石机. And here's a fun little fact for you. Vikings loved their personal weapons so much that they actually gave them names, really scary names, like leg biter. Yikes! Okay, on to our second myth, and this one is about their name. We call them Vikings, so naturally, that's what they must have called themselves. It seems obvious, but it's actually not that simple. Turns out, not exactly. The word Viking, in their own language, Old Norse, actually meant something more like pirate or raider. It describes something you did, not who you were. Most other people at the time just called them Northmen. And this brings us to our next key vocabulary word, raider. A raider is a person who attacks a place to steal stuff. In Chinese, that's a 袭击者, 袭击者. And this is a really important point. Not everyone from Scandinavia was a raider. Most of them were just regular farmers or fishermen or craftsmen living pretty normal lives. And now, it's time, the moment you've been waiting for. We're circling back to that first big question. It's the most famous Viking myth of all time, the horned helmet. The truth is, nope, they didn't wear them. A real Viking warrior would never wear horns in a battle. I mean, just think about it for a second. Those horns are a perfect handle for an enemy to grab, or a perfect target for a sword to get stuck on. It's just not practical. Real Viking helmets were smooth, they were round, and they were made of iron. They were designed to make swords slide right off. So where did the idea come from? You're not going to believe this. A 19th century opera. The costume designer thought horns looked more dramatic on stage, and the image just stuck. And our vocabulary word is, of course, helmet. In Chinese, that's a 头盔, 头盔. A simple word for a very, very important piece of gear, especially when you're in a battle. All right, moving on to myth number 4. And this one is all about the Viking lifestyle. The popular image is that these guys were always fighting, just spending their entire lives going from one raid to another. But is that really what they did? Not even close. For some of them, raiding was basically a summer job. You know, when the seas were calm, a group might go on an expedition. But the rest of the year, they were busy people. They were farming their land, fishing, and building those incredible ships. They had a whole other life outside of fighting. And for our final myth, let's talk about power. We tend to think of Viking society as this world completely dominated by big, bearded men. But was that really how it worked? Well, the reality is way more interesting. Viking women actually had a surprising amount of power. They were often in charge of the family's home and all the money, especially when the men were away traveling. And get this, some of them were even warriors. It's true. In 2017, archaeologists made this stunning discovery that a famous grave, one of a high-ranking warrior buried with all their weapons and horses, actually belonged to a woman. How cool is that? So our final vocabulary word for this part is warrior. That's 战士 in Chinese. And I think it's so important to remember that in Viking culture, that title wasn't just for men.
Okay, we've busted the big myths. So now let's take a quick look at what Viking life was really like when they weren't fighting. Because believe me, it wasn't all just swords and ships.
For fun, Vikings played these really cool strategy board games, a lot like chess. They were also super active. They loved to swim, wrestle, and ride horses. And you gotta love this detail. Beards were a huge source of pride. In fact, calling a Viking man beardless was one of the worst insults you could give him.
And get this, they weren't just fighters, they were poets. Viking poets, who were called skalds, were famous for writing these very clever, dramatic poems. They loved to use these special metaphors called kennings to describe things in a more exciting way. So I have a little challenge for you. Are you ready to think like a Viking poet? Let's see if you can guess what these mean. First up, what is the Wales Road? What do you think? It's the sea. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, next one, battle sweat. What could that possibly be? That is a very dramatic way of saying blood. And last one, the feeder of the wolf. Think about it. Who feeds wolves on a battlefield? A warrior. They were so creative, right? So as we've seen, that cartoon Viking with the horned helmet is definitely fun, but the reality, it's so much richer and more complicated. They were farmers and traders, explorers and poets, and yes, fierce warriors, both men and women. The truth is often way more surprising than the myth. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Let me know in the comments, which myth surprised you the most?